All right. Woohoo! He's progressive. Yes, to a degree. To a degree.
Do you have a mic?
I have a mic. I don't know about y'all.
You need to. Hey, you need to give this.
Yeah, go ahead and bring the hound.
Not destroy her hope.
Can we get the handheld up here?
Her father's in a terrible position.
But let me give you hope that your dad's a cool guy. And you're probably
We're in the top condition.
You want
Position.
to call him Doctor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell him that
Totes.
you and him can work out together. Tell him that you and him can work out together.
Da-dun-dun. Da-dun-dun. Look, and now we have a handheld.
I gotta get a place to start. You have a good place to start.
In the beginning.
All right.
Oh, we gotta get turned up
Let's
apparently.
get this microphone on, Lucas.
Turn my.
Hello.
Turn the bass.
Hello.
Up.
All right. Let's get started. So, today is a very, very special debrief.
Special debrief.
I feel like, Bishop, was your first Sunday here at Debrief?
I think it was.
I feel like it was. Because I feel like I remember being like,
Oh, this will
what a
be
weird
interesting
Sunday
him.
for him to be here. Maybe, I don't know.
Happy
Anyway,
anniversary.
today is a very special debrief because obviously this is the end of the year and we do a yearly debrief, but it's also the end of a 5-year period and we do a five-year breakdown debrief, but it's also the end of a 10-year period, specifically the 10-year period in which the church was formed in, because the church has been around for 10 years as of like a month ago. Right. We will be in the 10-year period. And it's also Pastor Dad's last debrief. So there will be a new leadership structure in place. So this is kind of a big deal in terms of what is being represented here. So we're not really going to talk about the first 5 years of the church because it's not prepared in our notes.
We don't talk about that.
Other than to say,
No, we can talk.
we can talk a little bit about it, but other than to say that next week when we talk, we're going to be talking about a completely new era in the church. But with that said, it'll be a completely new era. What we're debriefing now is the last 5 years, which in itself was a new era. And it's kind of marked by this. The first 5 years of the church we define as precustodial. Now, what that means is that it's the ministries that came before 2009. And the ministries that came before 2009 had a specific psychology to them. It was essentially that the church takes care of, what do I have it down? Yes, that the church takes care of us. And so when ministries were built, it was with the mentality that the church needed to take care of us, and the building needed to take care of us, and so on and so forth. And it was sort of a leftover mentality from when the church was Glencoe. In 2009, there was a switch over in mentality to a different psychology, and we call that the custodial era of the church. Now, there's a couple reasons why we call it the custodial era. One is because the mentality was different. One is because the last resource that was formed in that area is the Order of Custodians. And that is a division within the eldership, a distinction within the eldership that allows there to be, for lack of a better term, ranks. But with that said, it is also because the mentality was different. It changed from the church taking care of us to, what do you think? To us taking care of the church. And so there was a distinct focus at that point on things like ownership. and resources began to be formed during the custodial era. During the custodial era, resources began to be formed that were targeted at us taking care of the church, starting with what? With the Baby Ruth Society, and moving on from there. So what we're going to be talking about essentially is the church in the last 5 years during the custodial era of the church, which is where most of you have a real knowledge of the church in. There's not a lot of people who are from the pre-custodial era. Am I right? Who's from pre-custodial? So,
Some of them are unsure.
less than half, I would say. Okay. Anybody want to add anything?
What he said.
Are there any questions about that? The reason why we have to define them is because in archiving, part of what ABFID does, obviously, is archives the church for legacy purposes so that the future church can know the things that we've gone through as a church. So in archiving, we've had to make distinctions and, 2004 to 2009, pre-custodial. So.
Well, what I would say is that what took place was a major transition. So for example, when we were Glencoe, we were pastor led, which is the normal structure of most churches today, although many churches are starting to see the benefit of an elder-led church. Then we transitioned to an elder-led church. And you could probably in our history see that that's kind of like a honeymoon period when you get married. Because your first several years of becoming, and we essentially became a new unit. So the first several years of becoming a new unit, there's lots of adjustment, there's lots of tug and pull, there's lots of figuring out who you are and how you're going to progress. So the first 4 or 5 years of being Aletheia, we were going through that process. The elders were going through that process in order to lead the church correctly. And then the last 5 years that we're now looking at represents being able to transition through that and to come out with a cohesive approach to how it is that we've been operating. Okay, so that's all I would add.
Did you want to say?
All right, well, I guess, yeah. So basically what you have here, this is talking about the pre-custodial era. Once we switched over from Glencoe and we started as a new entity as Aletheia Bible Fellowship, we were, for all intents and purposes, an infant. Starting out with something new, brand new to this world, led by our parents. So our drive and our goals during that time were exactly what they needed to be. We needed the church to take care of us because we needed to gain that experience. We needed to be parented so that we could understand it. Now, mind you, our infancy was 5 years short. It was really short. We grow quick. We learn a lot. So we did stuff like go through the book of James, go through the Pauline epistles. I don't even remember what this one was.
We were kind of just all over the place in terms of what we were doing. We would have goals for the year, but we didn't really have a mentality of the future yet, and we weren't thinking in those terms. Somewhere along the way, right about the 4th year into the church, we started to discuss a different psychology. And we started to discuss the concept of what the church would look like in 10 years. Does that make sense? And so then we began to think, maybe we should have a plan in place. And that's where the advent of a 5-year plan came into being, because we anticipated this moment here. And we said, what will the church look like in 5 years? And so part of putting that plan into place was creating a set of sermons that would drive the church toward being what we term psycho-spiritually sound in God. And so we took a look at childhood development. We took a look at psychology and childhood development, and created a set of sermons that would take us through everything from year one in 2010, identity and role confusion. And we discussed adolescence, essentially, through the books of Genesis and Joshua. Then year two, in 2011, we discussed intimacy versus isolation. And we discussed essentially how to court each other. So we talked about 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. We talked about 1 and 2 Corinthians and spiritual gifts. We talked about the book of Philemon. In year three, that was 2012, we talked about purpose versus midlife crisis. And we talked about the book of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. Then we talked about righteousness versus despair. This should all be coming back to you. Righteousness versus despair in the book of John. And then this year we've been talking about trusting God versus having unfounded trust or blind faith. And we talked about Psalms and Hebrews. The important point for you to notice, though, is that the entire design of the last 5 years has been in pushing the church to understand the difference between childhood and adulthood. As a child, we are taken care of, right? But as adults, what do? We take care of. And so we stand here at this point in time hoping and recognizing that there has been a psycho-spiritual difference within the congregation. And you can see that in the different eras of the church and how we've grown as a body, where now our resources are geared toward taking care of the church as opposed to having the church take care of us. We no longer see, for instance, the building as a resource to get rid of, but instead we see it as something to be owned. So I want you to understand, I want you to step back from the picture that you've been standing within and realize that this has been a plan. All along, it's been a plan to get us to this point. Are there any questions? No? Yeah, I mean, psychology was from the get-go a recognition of the stages of development, of attachment, all of those things, in recognition of the fact that we are human beings and trying to be relevant in the development of human beings, and recognizing that if human beings act that way, which we all within our group recognize that human beings do, then that means that God probably acts that way too, even more so than us. So instead of trying to push away from that, we made a decision to embrace it and understand that our psychology is founded in God. And so because of that, we moved in that direction. And I would say it's successful.
The qualifier there would be to understand that years and years ago, Western Baptist up on the hill here offered a doctoral program for psychology, and then they had difficulty with that and they stopped offering that program. But one of the professors who was in charge of working that program, Dr. Larry Day, Dr. Day and I sat down and talked, and one of the things that he put forth and he holds to is that psychology is simply the study of and understanding of how man functions and how man sees things. And so you have to recognize that that exists. However, from a Christian standpoint, from a biblical standpoint, what the world does is makes everything having to do with psychology, which is nothing but a smorgasbord of theory, having to do with psychology as the standard and the rule. And Dr. Day points out rightly that psychology as a study itself is confused, and yet if it's put into submission of Scripture, then it helps to understand why people do the things that they do. The same would be said, for example, of the sister study, sociology and social science, of which I have degrees. So it's necessary, well, I point that up because it's necessary to understand how people function within social context as it relates to the church. And one of the reasons why many churches have difficulty today is because their leadership is not trained in understanding the social aspect of how society operates. So my point is that these studies are a part of who we are, but the goal is to put them into submission of Scripture and approach things from that standpoint.
Yes. Yes. And I'm about to tell you what those things are. So, over the course of the 5 years, the way that you gauge whether something is successful is, according to Scripture, by its fruit. You know that a prophecy is successful because it comes true. We know that our faith is successful because it produces works which are good. The way that you can tell whether a church body is successful is by A, how it loves each other, B, how it gathers together, and C, the works that it does, or the way that it pushes for works to be done that are good. We just studied this in Hebrews, right? Okay. So, over the last 5 years, there have been numerous creations. Now, I want to buffer this by saying that in the Precustodial Era, we eliminated everything but the Sunday morning services, those who remember, right? We eliminated everything but the Sunday morning services because they weren't working for us. When we came into the Custodial Era, we had a different mentality. It was to take ownership and start providing resources as opposed to wanting the resources to provide for us. So there was a creation, a boom of resources within the Custodial Era. So I want you to listen to this list, okay? And it may not even be complete. For the girls, there was the dots, which included the snowball, the Easter egg hunt, their version of the Mother's Day tea. There was the cookie bake. There was the pumpkin grams. And I'm sure there's more. There was the Baby Ruth Society, which included the prom and the root beer social and the valograms. There was even the welders as an official group, which included the spaghetti feed, holiday gift wrapping. Did everybody bring Lucas, did you bring your gifts? For the men, there was the Watchman Initiative, which included Man Night Monthly, which included also the Manquit. There was the advent of the Firewalkers, the advent of the men's prayer time. There's the advent of, even now, the Special Ops Division for James's side of management, which is doing a lot right now. You may not be able to see it, but that's kind of the point, like special effects. There was the Eldership Academy. There was the Order of Custodians. For the general church, there was the advent of the Fireflies, the advent of ABFID, which includes the presence of Archaeo, Archaeo Unbound, ETV, things like our t-shirts, flyers, websites, Facebook pages, so on and so forth. There was the new founded Event Planning Committee. There was the territory marking as a whole, which includes things like the kitchen, the development center, the family and care room, even the soundboard area. 5 years ago, that was not there. Instead, it was this pile of junk with a giant wood thing. There's Haven, communal living, putting things into practice outside the physical church. There's HeartScribe. There is Short Bus Bible Study. There's the Community Resource Center, which includes the fireworks tent, the neighborhood sale, Keep It in Play, the Mac Fair, presence even at the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association meetings. So, and I want to, well, yeah, okay. I'll go back to that later. There's the worship team. Think about what the worship team looked like 5 years ago, if you can. Think about what it looked like 10 years ago, if you can. The worship team, even now, has a growing membership. Colin became a drummer. Jasmine became a pianist. Beth became a flautist. I picked up the guitar. Bishop is on vocals now. The worship team is completely different. We do even original music. You're going to hear some of my music is played, but you're actually going to hear music that the worship team wrote during Christmas Eve. In attendance, there were losses in the custodial era due to the fact that we focused on the church's psycho-spiritual soundness. But there was also the emphasis on complete ownership in the cohesive day-to-day life rather than compartmentalized rational detachment. Rather than people like saying, this is church, this is life, I'm just going to look the other way. So yeah, there was some losses that took place, but that was because of our emphasis. However, because of our emphasis, there was a growth of spiritual anchor points necessary for spiritual and physical maturity. They include the church being well adept in things like ownership, cohesiveness in your worldview, fellowship, attendance, vulnerability, roles like gender identity and things like that, legacy, scriptural dependence, like going back to the scripture instead of just using slogans, hermeneutics, having a proper context for scripture, relevance. And you can see that our membership is growing. In terms of finances, that's not really my area, but go ahead.
All I wanted to say is the reason that in the precustodial era we looked at we looked at the possibility of selling this building is because this building was costing us a lot of money. It still does cost us a lot of money. We sold the parsonage because it was costing us a lot of money. We utilized those resources to try to keep at least one resource, and that is our body together as a whole. We have not only completely shifted focus, but we have maintained and, to a degree, taken care of what we've needed to take care of. We are a true picture of God sustaining us as a body, keeping us together, not fragmented, allowing us to keep this place operational is quite a feat, to be able to pay the bills on a regular basis. It's not like we have the most efficient furnace. This is a large area. It's not like our roof is holding it. But through taking ownership, this building has begun to look like home to us, and we've started taking care of it like it was home, and that means that our finances have been taken care of. Has it been tight? Yes. Have we had to rely on God because of that tightness? Absolutely. No better place. And I think that that has cascaded over to our personal lives as well. I think that every single one of you is in a better place, even financially, than you were 5 years ago. Even if you've taken a job that lost some money, like Wendy.
Yeah.
But she's okay with that because it's where she needs to be for now. So our finances, we are not, we're not rolling in it. We don't have the Scrooge McDuck bin to swim in our money.
Smog.
We don't have a big mountain either. I have a copper ring downstairs, but it's not the one. But we have been forced to rely on God to sustain us. And that shows with our attitudes, with our mentalities. And so all I'm going to really say about finances, even though the numbers may not look bigger than they were 10 years ago, it is more financially sound than it was 10 years ago, without a shadow of a doubt. I know I'm not suffering from any heartburn because of it. Well, that and the Prilosec I take every day. But it doesn't keep me up at night. And believe me, I've been in charge of this finances since before this was Aletheia Bible Fellowship. And it kept me up many a night. I'm really looking forward to Colin taking it over.
We, in the pre-custodial and even the beginning of the custodial era, and for the record, I'm not saying that finances should by any means be the judge of our fruit. Okay. But in the pre-custodial era and a little bit of the custodial era of the church, we were lucky to have made $200 from a fundraiser. Our mentality was that, we're going to work our hardest at, like a car wash or whatever. Like, we're going to throw these events and we'll be happy to make like $200. And that was like considered like, progressive. Most of the time we had a mentality of, to be honest, fleecing the flock. To be saying you should be giving more as opposed to we should be working harder. And